Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to a discussion in Likutei Sichos, the Rabbi's magnum opus, a discussion on the portion of Vayechi. This is a Sicha found in Likutei Sichos volume 25, the first Sicha for the portion of Vayechi. And the discussion revolves around the oath that Jacob asks his son Joseph to take, vowing that when his father passes, he will take his remains back to the Holy Land and not allow him to be buried in Egypt. This was a big deal by Jacob. I'm getting ready. The time is coming. I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want to go back to Israel to be buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron with the patriarchs and matriarchs. And I want you to promise, I want you to take an oath that you're going to do that. And this is a big deal. First of all, why did Jacob think that it was such a big deal? Because the Pharaoh would not want to let Jacob go so quickly, because Jacob was a miracle worker. We know from the Torah and from the Rashi commentary and otherwise that the minute Jacob came to Egypt, the famine ended. It was supposed to be a 7-year famine. It was only a 2-year famine. And the reason is because Jacob blessed the Pharaoh that the Nile River should rise up to his feet and irrigate Egypt, and suddenly no more famine. So Pharaoh wanted to keep this national treasure. Maybe he saw Jacob as some kind of deity, what have you. And Jacob wanted nothing to do with that. Plus, of course, he wanted to be in Hebron, in the holy place, with his forebearers, Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Rebecca and Leah. And therefore he said, I want you to take me back, but I want you to take an oath. And that becomes a discussion. What's the need for the oath? It's one thing to say, do me this favor. It's another even to promise me this favor. But here Jacob insists on an oath. Even after Joseph didn't offer it. It wasn't forthcoming with it. By the first request, he sort of asked it again. And why? Didn't he trust him? Didn't he trust him that he's going to keep his word? He needs an oath. Very strange. And commentary asked this question. This is not the Rebbe's original question. It's asked by classic commentaries, Nachmanides, the Kli Yakar, the Orachaim, a number of commentaries. The Rebbe notes them in the footnote, Sefornu, and they deal with it in a certain fashion. But as we're going to see, the discussion is, what about Rashi? He doesn't seem to address this question. How does he deal with it? So let's jump right in. So the first thing is, we have in front of us the verses. This is right at the beginning of this portion. And when it came time, it drew near for Israel to die, he called his son Joseph, and he said, if I found favor in your eye, please place your hand under my thigh and swear that upon my death, you will do for me the following act of genuine kindness. Please do not bury me in Egypt. Parenthetically, what's this putting his arm under his thigh? This was the way to take an oath, because you have to hold a mitzvah object, and pre-Sinai, the only mitzvah object was the bris, because everything else was done voluntarily. For something to be a holy mitzvah object, it needs to be a mitzvah imposed by heaven. And the only mitzvah pre-Sinai that was imposed, that was a commandment and not voluntary, was the bris. So even though it's a little bit immodest, so be it. And we find the same language earlier with Abraham asking his servant Eliezer to do the same thing, to hold on to the holy object of the bris and make the oath. Don't bury me in Egypt. Verse 30, for I'm going to soon lie down with my fathers, i.e. die, and then you must carry me out of Egypt and bury me with their burial place. And Joseph replied, quote, I will do as you say. 31, he said, swear to me. So Joseph swore to him, and Israel prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. So here the question becomes, as we discussed. Notice, first he says to him, I want you to put your hand under my thigh, which means I want you to swear to me. And Joseph says, I'll do it. Which means he didn't swear to him. He asked for an oath, and he said, I'll do it. It's like saying, no need for the oath. You got my word. And Jacob comes back and says, Not good enough. Swear to me. Look at the back and forth. In verse 29, he says, I want you to take an oath, essentially. Put your hand under my thigh. Take an oath. And what does Jacob say in verse 30? I'll do it. No oath. And Jacob comes back and says, swear to me. And Joseph relents. And again, the question becomes, as mentioned, we're talking about Joseph. He's a loyal son if there ever was one. Jacob and Joseph are one extension of a soul. Hello, this was a chassid to his Rabbi. Is there ever a question that he's going to do what he's asked to do? Especially when he makes a commitment and says, I'll do it. And this is the words of a king, in addition to being a loyal son. His father has to press him to the corner and say, swear to me. And it was clear that Joseph didn't want to take an oath, because otherwise he would have responded the first instance and do what his father said, just like Eliezer did. Abraham asked him to take an oath, and he did it. Joseph didn't run to do it. He just gave him his word, and Jacob pushes the envelope and says, I need you to swear to me. What's wrong with Jacob's word? Why is that not enough? And that an oath is required. That becomes the first question of the Sicha. The Rebbe in the footnotes addresses the fact that sometimes in the Torah, when there's an oath, it's because there's a lack of complete trust between the parties. There can be some level of trust, but not enough. And the Rebbe cites some examples. Abraham gave an oath to the king of Sodom and Gomorrah, of Sodom, that he's not going to take any of the booty. Abraham, when he made the treaty with Avimelech, the Philistine king, there's an oath there too. Eliezer, his servant, he asked him to take an oath. In all three instances, the loyalty was not guaranteed, even though Eliezer was very much a faithful servant. But nevertheless, it can be a difficult task, and he could give up on it. And certainly the two kings, and in order to show that this commitment is real, there's a place for an oath. Giving your word is nice, but when there is a doubt whether or not the commitment is 100%, or the ability is 100%, as in the case of the servant finding the wife for Isaac, an oath plays a role. But when you're dealing with Jacob and Joseph, the loyalty and the commitment and the trust is absolute. Why an oath? That becomes the Rebbe's first question. So, to help us with the flow of the Sicha, we set up this little flow chart. I hope you like it. Give me feedback if you do or you don't. And in front of you right now is the entire Sicha, the entire flow of the Sicha. What do you have? 8 steps. A question mark means a question. A light bulb means an answer. Exclamation point means an objection, which also often happens in the Sichas. The entire Sicha is in front of you, and each box that is highlighted, that represents the current discussion. The current discussion in the Sicha is that first question of the Rebbe: why did Jacob ask for an oath? Joseph already gave him his word. So, the Rebbe is now going to propose an answer. Let's look at the next slide where we have the answer. And the answer is given by commentary, that the oath was to guarantee Pharaoh's consent, not Joseph's. Of course, Joseph gave his word, and that's good enough. However, the Pharaoh might block it. As said earlier, the Pharaoh was in love with this Jacob thing. Jacob stopped the famine. The water rose up. And these were very hocus-pocus people. And the Nile to them was a deity because it irrigated the land, and they decided that's their God. And Jacob is the one who manipulated the Nile. Forget it. He must be, the God of gods. And he's not letting him go out. He's a national treasure, etc., etc. Naturally, the Pharaoh would not want to release it, and therefore say the commentaries. And this is the classic commentaries. Again, Nachmanides, Orach Chaim, Klei Yakar, Sefornu. They all say, basically, in other words, the same thing. Namely, of course, Joseph didn't have to give an oath in order to keep his feet to the fire. He's going to do it. He gave his word. This is his father. Are you kidding? There's nothing better that he wants to do than keep his commitment to his father's dying wish. However, there's somebody on top of Joseph, namely Pharaoh. Pharaoh, not so much does he want to let go of the Jacob. And we need to force the issue on the Pharaoh. We need to put the pressure on the Pharaoh. And if the Pharaoh is told that there's an oath involved, he's going to realize that it's not really negotiable. If Pharaoh realizes there's an oath involved, he's going to realize it's not negotiable. Joseph made an oath. Nobody expects you to break an oath. Some of the commentaries also add that the reason why the oath would deter the Pharaoh from pushing back, A, because he realizes that Joseph took an oath, but B, you see, Pharaoh had given Joseph had given Pharaoh an oath that he would never tell the world that he had one up on Pharaoh in the language department. Pharaoh apparently knew all 70 languages. Joseph knew then, plus the language of Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, the Holy Tongue, which Pharaoh did not know. So Joseph had one up on him. And apparently in the monarch business, this was a big deal. And this is a secret that no one could ever know. So the Pharaoh made Joseph take an oath, I guess, right at the beginning of his viceroyhood. That will never come out. And Joseph took an oath. So the Pharaoh knew his mouth is sealed. His lips are sealed on that. So now when Joseph takes an oath to his papa that he's going to bury him in Egypt, that he's going to bury him in Israel, Joseph knew the Pharaoh can't really pressure him because you want me to keep your oath, I got to keep my other oath to my father. So that's how the commentaries answer the question. And it's very logical. It's not to pressure Joseph. Joseph doesn't need any pressure. He would love to do this. It's to pressure the Pharaoh. It's to empower Joseph against the Pharaoh. I will often come to my board of directors and I'll ask them to pass a certain ruling about our Chabad. And they'll say, Rabbi, you're the boss. You can do what you want. I said, I know, but I need this to be a board decision, a board resolution, so that when people nudge me and say, Rabbi, can we make an exception? I'm going to say it's a board resolution. Sometimes you want to be imposed upon in order to be able to stand your ground. And that's how the commentaries explain this whole episode with the oath. Says the Rebbe, it is a but. And the but is, we're at the objection. We're at the highlighted box with the exclamation point. I'm very proud of our little map here. Rashi is silent on this. This explanation must be obvious. It's all well and good that all these commentaries, we're naming classic commentaries, Ramban, Nachmanides, Orach Chaim, the Holy Orach Chaim, Kleyakar, Seforno, they all say pretty much, all address this because it's a common problem. What was the need for the oath? The pushback, did you pressure Joseph for the oath after he clearly gave his word? Why wasn't it sufficient? They all give the very logical answer that it was to pressure the Pharaoh. Why didn't Rashi say the same thing? Rashi is silent. That means Rashi doesn't go with that explanation. We know that the Rebbe is very big, of course, on the teachings of Rashi, and the Rebbe maintains that Rashi will not say anything in his commentary that's obvious from the text. But also Rashi will never skip a problem that's obvious from the text. This is a problem that's obvious from the text. Papa says to his loyal son, give me an oath. The son says, I give you my word. The papa says, no, I want an oath. That's a problem. Like, why? Proof that it's a problem, that all the other commentaries address it and give their answer. Rashi is silent. Is it not a problem to Rashi? Clearly it is. So why wouldn't he say, what's the explanation? Why doesn't he say why Joseph was being pressured for the oath? The Rebbe points out further in the footnote that even if Rashi, let's say, doesn't have an answer, he's not silent. There are some occasions where Rashi will say, I don't know the explanation of this or that, the other, which means whenever there's something that's wanting for an explanation, Rashi will address it. Here, Rashi remains silent. That means it's so obvious. The need for the oath, it's so obvious that even after Joseph gave his word, that's not good enough. And it's so obvious that it's not good enough that Rashi doesn't even have to explain it. Why not? Why not? Why is it obvious? What's obvious about this? So, and the Rebbe says, by the way, it's quite clear that Rashi doesn't believe, like the other commentaries, that the reason for the oath was to deter the Pharaoh. First of all, Rashi's silent. He would have said it. It would have been the easiest thing, just say it. But the second thing is, there's further conclusive proof that Rashi does not maintain that position, like Nachmanides and the others, that this was to deter the Pharaoh, to deter the Pharaoh. You know why? Because Rashi does bring that discussion, but not now, in chapter 50. Much later on in the discussion, after Jacob passes on, Joseph has Paro approached on his behalf by Joseph's people to request permission to emigrate Jacob's remains to the land of Canaan. And in that conversation, Joseph makes sure to communicate that this was an oath. And Rashi explains, and Pharaoh says, go ahead and do it as per your oath. And Rashi explains there in chapter 50, 2 chapters from now, that's the only reason the Pharaoh relented is because of the oath. As said earlier, because the Pharaoh knew that he too had an oath on Joseph. And if you tell Joseph to give up on one oath, he might give up on the other. The one with the 71 languages. Says the Rebbe, the fact that Rashi brings this later in chapter 50, that means that Rashi believes that it's not an issue here. It's the explanation over there. When the verse says that Pharaoh relented, as per your oath, that's the language of the verse, as per your oath, aha! We know that that's the reason for the explanation, because of the business with Joseph's oath to the Pharaoh. Clearly, though, that redoubles our proof that that's not what Rashi intended here in the initial part of the story when the question first arises, why the need for the oath in the first place, that the intention was to strong-arm the Pharaoh. It so happened that it worked. But that wasn't the intention, because if it was, Rashi would have said it now. What I just told you is in the next slide. You take a look. This is chapter 50, verse 5. Jacob already passed away. Jacob sends a message to his father, to the Pharaoh. My father made me take an oath on his deathbed. And I took an oath that I'll bury him in Canaan. So allow me to do so. Says the Pharaoh in verse 6, go to Canaan and bury your father as he had you swear. So Rashi there is bothered. What's this thing, as he had you swear? Why does the Pharaoh have to stick it to him? Because it was only because of the oath that the Pharaoh agreed. Take a look at this commentary. As he had you swear, says Rashi, were it not for the oath, I would not allow it, because the Pharaoh was afraid to tell Joseph, break the oath, said he wouldn't answer. If so, I'll also break the oath that I swore to you not to divulge that I know the holy tongue, Hebrew, besides the other 70 languages that you also know, which you do not know, as stated in the tractate Sota. As I mentioned earlier, that Joseph had taken the oath to the Pharaoh. So again, Nachmanides and the other commentaries believe that this discussion, that's the reason why Jacob made him take the oath to begin with. And that's how they explain the problem as it arises in chapter 48. Rashi does not explain that over there. So clearly Rashi holds this is not the reason for Jacob employing the oath. Rashi is silent on it. What is the reason? I don't know. Something so obvious that Rashi has no need to state it. It's obvious just from text alone that that Jacob would want an oath. It's for good reason. This business with this strong arming the Pharaoh, it so happened to work. And as Rashi does indicate it, that in the end, in the final analysis, when it actually came down in real time in chapter 50, yes, Pharaoh did say, I'm going to relent because of the oath. But clearly that's not what, from Rashi's perspective, what Jacob had in mind to begin with. Otherwise, Rashi would have said this whole narrative in front of us. He would have said it in chapter 48. And he doesn't. So we're back to square A. What is Jacob thinking? What is Jacob thinking? Why the need to pressure his son for an oath? So, we're following our map. We're in the fourth box with the light bulb. This is going to be a Rebbe's explanation. The oath means that this must happen. Hence, constant focus from now, removing any obstacle that may appear. Rebbe explains why the need for an oath. There's something special about an oath. It's not to deter the Pharaoh. It's to guarantee that Joseph will do this no matter what. Why? Because an oath is different than a promise. Remember, the question was, why the need for a promise? For an oath, we already gave a promise. The answer is a promise is not an oath. A promise means I give you my word. An oath means I give you my life. We had this in the last week's the Torah portion of 2 weeks ago, that Yehuda gave his father an oath that he'll bring back Benjamin. And that's when Jacob agreed to send Benjamin, because the language is, if I don't bring him back, I will sin for you all my life in this world and in the next. An oath means I'm bound to this. This must happen. You know, I love sharing the story how they're interviewing a teacher for a job interview for a particularly rowdy class. And they know they need somebody really good. So a whole bunch of potential teachers come for the interviews, and the principal asks them all one question. What do you do if a kid in your class gets up and slaps you across the face in front of the whole class? And each one of the prospective teachers gives a different answer. I would respond harshly. I'll respond softly. I'll send him to the principal. I'll make a ruckus. Each one had a different solution. And the principal said, thank you very much. This job's not for you. And then finally, one teacher approaches, and the principal says, same question. What do you do if someone in your class slaps you across the face in front of the whole class? To which the teacher says, Madam Principal, in my class, this is not going to happen. Says the principal, you got the job. That's called confidence. That's like what an oath is. Excuse me, this is not going to happen. Or in the positive, this is going to happen. Not I give you my word that I'm going to try my best, that I'm going to do it. I'll try my very best. It's not a matter of trying. It's a matter of getting it done. It will happen. And why so? Because that's what an oath represents. An oath represents not just I'm committed to doing it, I'm committing myself to it. This becomes important. This becomes like part of my life. It's now part of my life. We're not so familiar with this concept because thankfully we don't take oaths. We're not supposed to take oaths. What comes to mind is the oath that the soul is administered before it comes down on earth, as per the first line in the Tanya, quoting the Talmud, that the soul is given an oath that what? That it will be righteous, that it will be righteous and not wicked. And it's explained because it empowers the soul to do the right thing. But in the context of this Sicha, it's not just giving it power. What if the soul was given a promise? The Rebbe is explaining that when you take an oath, you are committed. It's part of who you become. It's not just on your to-do list. It's not just on top of your to-do list. It's not just important. It's not just urgent. It's not just critical. It's part of you. It's like it's impossible without you, without it. As much as you're here, that has to happen. And therefore, when the soul is administered an oath before birth, that means to be good. That means to be good becomes part of your raison d'etre, becomes part of who you are. You might say, you become good. Similarly here, Jacob told Joseph, I want you to take an oath. Jacob was no one's fool. And he knew this is not going to be an easy thing, and he knew that there would be pushback. The Pharaoh, and he's the monarch. At the end of the day, he's the boss. And he's not going to want to lose this national treasure. And therefore, he told Joseph, I don't need you to promise me. I just need you to make it happen. It's much more than promise me. I need this to happen. Guaranteed. And that's what an oath will do. And the Rebbe goes through the trouble to not only explain that the oath means that you are committed with your life, but how practically that makes it better. I understand psychologically that it's a deeper commitment with my life. But what's the practical difference? Joseph is the viceroy. He's a loyal son, and he made a promise. Why is that not enough? What difference will it make that he made an oath? Practically speaking, how is it more? So the Rebbe says, because being that an oath means that I'm committed with my life. Similar to the example we gave of the oath of Judah to his father that Benjamin is coming back, come what may. If something is part of who you are, it's part of your life. You might say, I'm committed with my life. Again, we're not familiar with this because we are discouraged from taking oaths. We don't take oaths. We don't even like to take vow promises. We say Bali Neder all the time. But there is such a concept. The only oath that we take is the oath before birth to be good. But when we understand the concept that an oath means I'm committed, this is who I am, now I become obsessed with it. I don't think about it only when it arises, when the time comes. Every moment of my life, I'm planning for it. I'm avoiding any pitfalls. Anything that comes up, any red flag that may get in the way of the problem, as a problem from this happening, I'm going to nip it in the bud immediately because this is my life. It's like a threat to your life, even a small threat. Get it out of the way completely. And similarly here, Joseph, you're viceroy. I know you're important and you're powerful and you love me, but there's a Pharaoh. And if you take an oath, you're going to keep your eyes and ears open. You're going to do whatever it takes. Not when the time comes, from now, because the time comes, it may be too late. With all your good intentions, if you just worry about it then, the Pharaoh comes and says, I'm sorry, it's not happening. What are you going to do then? But here you're going to put things in place. You're going to make plans. You're going to make sure you'll plan accordingly because this must happen. It's not just an important to do or an urgent to do. It must happen, and therefore your life depends on it, so to speak, and therefore it lives with you constantly. And that's what is represented in the Rebbe's explanation right here in our fourth box in the map. Namely, that the oath means it must happen, and hence its constant focus from now, removing any obstacles that may appear. So this seems very, very good. However, the Rebbe still has a but. This is the answer, apparently, that the Rebbe is giving on the pshat level, on the literal level. The rest of the Sicha is on a Hasidic level. Even though it flows as if it's a question objecting to the prior answer. That's why I have an exclamation point. You just gave a light bulb. I got an exclamation point. You just gave me an answer. I got an objection, because that's how the Sicha is presented. But really, if you read it carefully, you realize that here ends the Peshat discussion of the Sicha, and now starts the Hasidic. Let me explain. On the Peshat level, that's the answer that the Rebbe gives. What's the reason for the need for the oath? Why did Jacob not suffice with Joseph's promise? According to the Rashi. And the answer is because there's a whole different kettle of fish than a promise. A promise is nice. An oath means a personal commitment. And if something is really difficult, you want an oath. You want to be able to say, in my class, this will never happen. Or in this case, dear Papa, this will happen. Not I promise, not I'm committed, not I love you, not I'll do everything I can. I don't need any promises. I just need it to happen. Like life itself, it's going to happen. And therefore it makes sense because Jacob realized how difficult it is. And it's not because he doesn't love his son and doesn't trust his son. It's because he understands how important and how difficult this might become. However, the Rebbe still pushes back. And he says, but at the end of the day, Joseph, I'm reading the map, Joseph still appreciates the importance of the request. At the end of the day, this is not totally satisfactory, which is why the Rebbe is now going to present a deeper interpretation on the Hasidic level. Why not totally satisfactory? Excuse me, because Joseph understands what it means, a promise. You're telling me a promise is no great shakes. That's why you need an oath. Depends from whom. It's a promise from Joseph. He's a serious person. And he's a person who understood that this was very important to his father because his father wanted him to take an oath. Before he took the promise, his father said, can you put your hand and take an oath on the bris? And Joseph said, I give you my word. So Joseph knows, even though he didn't take the oath yet, he just gave his word, but he knows his father is requesting it as an oath, which means this is of great import. And therefore, clearly, Joseph understood the severity and the seriousness, and clearly he would, even without an oath, have done everything in his power to make it happen and not let any pressure get in the way. So how come the oath is needed? It's like at the end of the day, it's still not totally satisfactory. And the Rebbe will come back and explain to us the answer according to the Hasidic level, your next light bulb. And which in general, when we're students of the Rebbe and students of Hasidus, we always look for the rest of the story. Every narrative in Torah has its plain story, but also there's a deeper meaning. And the Rebbe will often maintain that even in Rashi, which is nominally pshat, the literal level of interpretation, but there's always what the Rebbe refers to as the wine of Torah. There's deeper meanings in Chassidic interpretation, spiritual interpretation, which is really what makes Torah so fascinating. That all these biblical figures, they represent spiritual figures. They represent cosmic figures that empower all the Jewish people and each of us individually, etc. And therefore, this story between Jacob and Joseph and the discussion, I need you to bury me. And he says, I promise you. And he says, that's not enough. I need an oath. It's got to be a deeper meaning, as we would say, what's the rest of the story? What's the rest of the story? Just because without the oath, he doesn't have that empowerment of an oath, as explained earlier, the power of an oath that your life is committed, not totally satisfactory. Because a person on the level of Joseph would understand how important it is. So therefore, the Rebbe gives the Hasidic interpretation. And that is, let's read it to the light bulb. Rebbe's Hasidic interpretation, Joseph's soul mission is different than Jacob's soul mission. Let me explain this orally and we'll come back to the screen. Joseph and Jacob are two different type of people. This is discussed in many Sichas. This is one of them. That father and son, they're very similar in a lot of ways. And Joseph is the main heir of Jacob, and he follows his path and everything else. But their souls are different. That's why they need both. And what they impart to the Jewish people throughout history and as they embark in exile are different powers. Jacob's soul is one type of soul, and Joseph's soul is a different type of soul. As the Rebbe is going to explain, Jacob's soul requires him to go back to Israel after he dies. Joseph's soul would actually argue that he should stay in Egypt. Proof is that Joseph himself was buried in Egypt, which is kind of strange. Joseph makes an oath. Jacob makes an oath, take me back to Egypt. Joseph, when he dies, is buried in Egypt. Not only is he buried in Egypt, but that's how the Torah portion ends. The whole book ends, and we all get up in shul and scream, Chazak, Chazak, Veniz Chazek, as if it's great news. Torah's there. We finish a book. It's supposed to end on a good note. And what was the end? That Joseph is buried in Egypt? Because from Joseph's soul perspective, he should stay in Egypt. That's an empowerment. That's a good thing. He stays with the Jews. From Jacob's perspective, he's got to get the heck out of there as soon as possible. How could both things be true? Is it good to stay or good to leave? Depends who you are. So the example I want to give, and the Rebbe points out in the Sicha, Jacob comes from Atzilus, from a different top-down relationship, from a spiritual realm called Atzilus, where the world really is inconsequential. Jacob looks at the world from top down. He shines his light, but he doesn't engage. The world is not really real to him, whereas Joseph is invested in the world. He becomes part of the world, and he engages. So I want to give the analogy that I like to give for this subject, and that is that there are two types of shluchim. I witnessed this myself when I was a yeshiva bacher studying in Los Angeles, that there were two head shliachs in the state of California, both sent by the Rabbi. And his job was to be engaged. He was in charge of buying buildings and selling buildings and making programs and getting on television and being on the news and really being engaged. That would be like the Joseph style shliach. He's involved. He's engaged. He's well known. He's involved in the business aspect of transforming the state and opening one Chabad house and another and a third and another. making the parades, whatever they do. But then there was another shliach that the Rebbe sent, an old chassid, who spent most of the day in personal prayer. The other part of the day was running around Fairfax Avenue wrapping tefillin. He wasn't involved in the day-to-day running of the operation on that level. He remained aloof. He remained as if he was back in 770 with the Rebbe. And yet he did not have less impact. He had tremendous impact. The whole state, every Jew knew about him. He was famous in the state. And in his own way, he influenced the whole Jewish community in a fantastic way, because just by the aura of his spirituality, he transformed people. The first shliach transformed people by door-to-door combat. He built a Chabad house, he brought a shliach, he brought another shliach, he made a program, he lectures, camps, parades, the way you impact people by getting involved with them. This other shliach remained aloof. But just by his spirituality, by the aura, by the presence, by just watching him pray, by watching the way he wraps the tefillin with a Jew with complete love and passion for the mitzvah, that impacted, and the ripple effect affected Jews throughout the entire state. Why do the Rebbe send these two shliachs? Because apparently both are needed, you see. You need to shine the light, and then you need to elevate from the bottom. If somebody's drowning in a pool, I happened to see by divine providence a little clip in the news a couple of days ago. Somebody was walking on an ice lake, and the ice broke, and now he's in the lake, and he's freezing to death. So they sent professional police divers to save him. The police diver that went to save him, he too, you see, was chained to a rope. And there were police on the shore, on the ground, on the dry land, holding on to that rope. So why did you need two? You might say the guy holding on to the dry land, that's like the Jacob. If you jump in with someone that's drowning, God forbid, you could drown too. So you need someone on dry land like Jacob that's completely secure, holding on to the rope. But you also need a Joseph. You need somebody to go in and save the person. In my analogy of the two shaliachs, you got the one shaliach who gets involved, and he's involved out there, one person by person, try to elevate them and encourage them. But you also need the shaliach who stands from behind and elevates the whole situation. And therefore, to give another example, by the way, in Chassidus, this is a very big subject. Chassidus says there's two ways that we have influence. One what's called Oyer, one what's called Shefa. Translation of Oyer means light. Shefa means influence. And they both mean similar things, but there's a very big difference. And the classic example that Chassidus gives, light, the example of light would be sunlight. The example of Shefa, influence, would be a teacher and a student. Think about this. When you have sunlight, the sun impacts the entire area, but it's not affected by the area. The sun shines, and it can be a palace, and it can be a gorgeous garden, and it can be a garbage dump. It reaches everywhere, and it's effortless. It's not affected. It doesn't become bogged down by it, and that's its power. But that power is also limited, you see, because it's top down. It's limited. Where do you see the limitation of that power, of that influence? On the one hand, the space is lit up bright. Again, be it a palace or a garbage dump or everything in between, it's lit up brightly. But the minute the sun sets and it becomes nightfall, it's as dark as the night. And you walk in, you say, I don't understand. This place was very, very bright. Yeah, but the sun left. Okay, but some light should have stayed. It should have impacted. There's no impact. Top down is just that. It's top down. You want to transform, you got to engage. So on the one hand, there's a plus with the top down because the sun is not impacted. It's like that shliach who's not engaged. There isn't the danger that he's going to be drawn down and become bogged down by the negativity of the space in which he's influencing. He remains on his perch. He's always in 770. The particular shliach that I was talking about, it's said that every single day of his, 60 years of being a shliach in California, he would say the Tfilas Haderech, the daily prayer of a traveler, albeit without the name of Hashem at the end. Every day for 60 some odd years, he would say the prayer of a traveler because he's traveling. He's really in 770. That's like the analogy of the influence from top down, like the sunlight, which is not impacted by the palace or the gorgeous park or the garbage dump for that matter. It just shines its light. He's influencing the whole state just by his prayer. He's not there. He's from afar. He's from the perch. He's really in 770 in Brooklyn. So you do need more engagement. And the second example would be, it's given in Chassidus, the example of the teacher and the student. With a teacher and a student or students, you have to involve yourself. You have to figure out what that student needs to understand the subject matter. You have to tailor your thoughts and your message to the thought process of each student because you want to reach them. This is not shining some light. This is not some aura. This is engagement. And therefore, on the one hand, it's much more bogged down. The teacher has to think how they're going to give that message to this student like this and to this student like that. In a way, there's a bogged downness. However, conversely, the impact in a lot of ways is much more real. The teacher can leave the room. The teacher can go to the other world. The student still has the information because the student has been transformed. So this is a yin and a yang that Chassidus talks about a lot. The Rebbe has it in the Sichas a lot. And the Rebbe brings it in the model of Yaakov and Joseph, Jacob and Joseph respectively. Jacob being a soul of Atzilus. Even as they were in this world, the patriarchs and matriarchs were from that other space called Atzilus. They're like divine lights in human bodies. They're like angels. They're like visitors. They're like sunshine. Wherever they go, everything works. The Nile rises up. The Pharaoh asks for a blessing. I mean, everything is wonderful, but it's effortless. They're not engaged. And therefore, their job is, when I pass away, get me the heck out of here. I don't belong in Egypt. It's not my place. I'm a visitor. I don't even belong here on earth. But certainly Egypt, I'm happy to share my light with it, but get me out. I think the example of the Shaliach who says the daily traveler's prayer is perfect. I'm going back home because I'm traveling to begin with. Versus Joseph, he represents like the shliach who's engaged, or like the teacher who's engaged with the student. Joseph is engaged with Egypt. He ran the affairs of Egypt. He had them circumcised. He ran their economy. He moved the people around. He was completely engaged. And the way it's written in the Midrashic writings, it affected him. He needed to think it through. It didn't affect him adversely because he was such a powerful soul, but it was tiring work. It was tremendous effort, like that teacher who sweats when they're trying to figure out what's the right way to approach the student. And therefore, Joseph says, when my time comes, bury me in Egypt. I'm going to stay here with my people. I understand Egypt, even though Joseph is such a giant soul that Egypt doesn't affect him adversely. He affects it, he transforms it, and he helps the Jews, therefore follow suit and remain whole and kosher and survive the exile of 200 years in Egypt. He helps them. But you know how? By staying with them. Or like my silly analogy of the news item that I saw, the lifeguard who is on the shore, he's holding back, but the other one's got to jump in. Somebody's got to go in. It's not enough just to be from the perch. And therefore, Jacob says, I want to go back to the Holy Land. I don't belong here. Says the Rebbe, Joseph's inclination would be to say, Papa, why do you want to go back? We need you here. Because from Joseph's perspective, not just from comforts. By the way, on a practical level, Rashi explains that Joseph couldn't go back. That's why Joseph said to have his remains buried in Egypt. Because who's going to have the power to pull it off? When Jacob dies, he has a son Joseph who's viceroy in position of power. When Joseph dies, there's no one in position of power. So Joseph was resigned to the fact that he's going to stay in Egypt. But on a spiritual level, which is the rest of the story, Joseph says, let me be buried in Egypt. And he's thinking about, Papa, you want to go back to Canaan, to the land, to the Holy Land? Stay in Egypt. From Joseph's soul perspective, that's the best way to elevate a space, engage in it, get involved in it. Don't run away from it. But he fails to understand that Jacob has a different role. The problem is that Joseph is the one that has to pull this off, and therefore, hence, his father makes him take an oath. Because an oath represents you're going to do this even if you don't understand it. An oath means I'm committed. It's like the vow that people take under the chuppah, right? An oath means I'm committed even if it's super rational. I don't understand it. Joseph doesn't understand it. He can't understand it. It's not how his soul works. He's the engaged type of shaliach. He's not the aloof type of shaliach. But Jacob is the aloof one. And therefore, Jacob says, I know you're going to stay in Egypt, but me, I'm getting the heck out of here. And I need you to make it happen. And I know you're not going to want to make it happen. A part of you is going to say, this is a bad idea. Do it anyway, because I said so. And that's what an oath means. Do it anyway, even if you don't understand. And therefore, Jacob makes Joseph take an oath to do something that's contrary to Joseph's makeup. This is a whole different conversation. Conversation has now been elevated to Chassidus, to spirituality, to Kabbalah, to mysticism. He needs to elevate it. He needs to have him take an oath, because otherwise Joseph might try to do it, but part of him is going to say, this is against my better judgment. And if the Pharaoh objects, Joseph might say, oops, Pharaoh objected. And deep in his heart, he's thinking, good. We could use a soul like Jacob in Egypt. Says Jacob, no. You take an oath. It's against your grain. It's against your soul's mission. But my soul mission is different than yours. You're going to elevate the Jews bottom up. I'm going to elevate the Jews top down. You're going to elevate the Jews by being amongst them. I'm going to elevate the Jews from the top. You're the lifeguard from inside the water. I'm the lifeguard from the shore. So let's go back to our map. Let's do a quick recap. What we just discussed now is the Hasidic answer of the Rebbe, the light bulb over here, which is step number 6 in the map. Joseph's soul mission is burial in Egypt. Jacob's soul mission is burial in the Holy Land. And the oath represents a super rational commitment. Do for me, says Jacob, what my soul's mission requires and not what yours. Let's really quickly recap the entire map, where we are so far. The Rebbe opened the question, why did Jacob ask for an oath when Joseph already gave him his word? And we explained there's no need for an oath when you have a promise unless there's a lack of trust. But here there wasn't. So the commentaries, Nachmanides and others, they all answer that the oath is to guarantee Pharaoh's consent, not Joseph. Says the Rebbe, but that's clearly not Rashi's position, because Rashi doesn't mention it at all. Rashi's silent about this subject. In fact, this whole business of this coercing the Pharaoh's hand is brought in Rashi, albeit in chapter 50. So clearly it's not the way Rashi sees the meaning of Jacob's requirement of an oath. So why is Jacob requiring an oath? Says the Rebbe. On the Rashi level, there's no need for any explanation. An oath means, like that teacher says in my class, this will never happen. An oath means this will happen. It's part of who I am. It's my life depends on it. And therefore, I'll always look ahead and plan it. That's the answer according to the literal level, the pshat level on Rashi. However, the Rebbe digs deeper and says, but still Joseph does appreciate the importance of the request. I'm following the map. A request made by his father, requesting an oath. So even though Joseph didn't initially offer the oath, but he understands the import and he's so loyal. So why is there still a need for an oath? And the Rebbe says the real answer is because there is a Hasidic element, a spirituality, as most stories, as really every story in Torah has a spiritual / psychological side to it, and that is that Jacob and Joseph represents these two souls. I've shared with you a few different examples. The two shaliachs, the aloof one or the engaged one, the two lifeguards, the one on the shore and the one who jumps into the pool, or the Hasidic classic example, sunlight versus teacher-student. And the common denominator of all three of these examples is the influence aloof or is it engaged? Jacob's soul is the influence from aloofness. Joseph's soul is the influence through engagement. And therefore, Jacob's soul needs to go back to Israel. He's not comfortable in Egypt at all. Even when he lives there, he lives in Goshen. He lives away from everybody else. He can't stand this place. He's not an Egyptian. He's an Israeli. Joseph is an Egyptian. He's engaged. And therefore, the oath is needed because on a spiritual level, in all good conscience, Joseph feels he's not doing the Jews a favor by moving Jacob to Israel. And therefore, because Joseph himself had to be buried in Egypt, that's his sole mission. He belongs in Egypt. This is spelled out in the verses, you see. Chapter 47. First of all, I want to point out that the last verse on the screen, this is the last verse in the book. The last verse of the book of Genesis. Last verse of the portion of Vayechi, but the last verse in the book of Genesis. And how does the book end? As I mentioned this earlier briefly, that Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's the end. And we're all going to stand up in shul and scream, Chazak, Chazak, V'nis Chazak. We get strength. And the Rebbe discusses in another Sicha that how is this a good way to end? There's a principle should only end on a good note. Every Torah portion has to end on a good note, let alone a whole book. Here, the book ends that Joseph died and buried in Egypt. That's nice. That's a good way to end the book. It's a terrible thing. And the Rebbe explains there that this is good news. The Jews are now going to stay in Egypt and for 210 years. The good news is Joseph is staying with them. He's embalmed. He's in Egypt. The Jews are going to survive this by the power of his soul. And the Rebbe then in that other Sicha says the previous Rebbe, his name was Joseph. He too operated, and it's also in the footnote in our Sicha, incidentally, that the previous Rebbe's name is Joseph, and he operates in the style of the engagement, like Joseph. Let's get involved, the whole movement of shlichus, and get involved, and the mitzvah tanks and mitzvahim, not just shining the light that perhaps the way Lubavitch was back, I don't know, in the city of Lubavitch, where they just were, a beam of light of Torah, a holy city, and in that way impacted all of Russia. Go out to each community and go out to Manhattan and visit people in their offices and put on tefillin and teach them about Shabbos candles, etc. Engagement. That's the first name of the previous Rabbi, Yosef. And of course, the Rebbe did the same thing on steroids. And therefore, the previous Rebbe says, the previous Rebbe is buried with us. The Rebbe says, not other talk, which clearly applies to our Rebbe as well. It could have easily said, I want to be moved to Israel. That wouldn't fit his sole mission. Many Jews till today asked to be moved to Israel. And you know where they're getting their cue from? They're getting it from Jacob. There's something to be said about being in the Holy Land. But when you're a Joseph soul, you stay with your people and you need to be there because you lift up from the bottom rather than pulling up from the top. And therefore, that becomes the end of the book. It is indeed a good way to end. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. We're about to go into Egypt. Before we start the book of Exodus, the book of exile, really. We need to know that our power comes from our leader, from Joseph being in Egypt. But in truth, as the Sicha explained, it's a yin and a yang. Notice the word that was highlighted. Jacob is saying, I'm going to pass on. I want you to carry me out of here. The Hebrew word nisasani. Joseph is buried in Egypt, as we just said in the last verse in the portion. But eventually, you should take me out. You know when? When you leave. When God remembers you and takes you out, you will take me out with you. But here too, it doesn't say the Hebrew word nisasani, to lift me out. It says v'ha'alisem, to elevate me. It's different. It could have said the same word. I mean, it should have theoretically have the same word. Jacob says, I want you to nisasani, carry me out. And Joseph should say, when the time comes, not now, but later, when the Exodus is over, which of course was carried out later through Moses in the book of Exodus, nisasani, carry me out. The Torah changes the word. The Rebbe says the word nisasani really means to lift up. To lift up. Like a nasi, nesiut, to lift up. This denotes the fact that Jacob is saying, why do I want to go back? Because I'm uplifted from this place to begin with. I'm a visitor here. I'm like an angel from another place. I never really settled in here. And therefore, when the time comes, let's activate that. In fact, Nosasani, lift me up, because I'm always uplifted anyway. But Yosef, he's also above the exile, but in a different way. He uplifts the whole exile with him. V'ha'alisem, the root is the word aliyah, like when you call to get up to the Torah, or somebody makes aliyah and go to the Holy Land, to elevate, to go up, to elevate the galus, the exile with him, which is different. The Sasani could mean I'm aloof. Ha'alisa means I elevate. Again, the Sasani means I'm shining my life on the top, but I'm really removed. I'm aloof. That might be another way of saying Nisasani. Naso, I'm elevated. I'm aloof. I'm above. Ha'alisa means I'm elevating the whole thing with me. And here, therefore, we're in a good place. So we understand why Jacob needed Joseph to take an oath. We have two interpretations. One on the practical level, because the oath will guarantee it happens, because you're binding your soul to it. Hence, you're going to be obsessed with it constantly to make sure that it happens. It's not just something you're going to do when the time comes. And we have a Hasidic interpretation, which further sweetens it up. And that is that Joseph is told to do something contrary to his own soul's nature, because it's in line with Jacob's soul nature, and therefore Joseph has to take an oath. An oath means I'm doing something even though it's contrary to my thinking. So what's left? Everything's good. The Sicha should end here. Says the Rebbe. Still, why was Jacob so adverse to Joseph's way of thinking? We sort of answered this already, but we're going to play it out. Let's take a look. The next step, the bottom right of the screen, the question mark. Rebbe's question, why was Jacob so adverse to elevating the Jews by burial in Egypt? Once you explained to me that Joseph has a point. He wants to be in Egypt because that's the best way to elevate the Jews. As explained at length, chazak, chazak, it's a good thing. So Jacob should have said, I'm not going to bother you with an oath, because if that what happens, that's not so bad. If it's good for Joseph, it's good for Jacob. And the answer is no. The Jews need both. The Jews need both, and this becomes the final step of our map. The answer is the elevation also requires connection to something higher. You see, this is not a repeat of the prior step. The prior step was, why would Joseph think differently? Because his soul is different. And therefore Joseph would think stay. Jacob needs to make sure he promises, he takes an oath to leave. Because his soul says stay, his soul says leave. But the Rebbe now pushes forward. In the end of the day, since there's two approaches, two tzaddiks, two holy souls, one approach is stay, one approach is leave. No, if you end up staying, is it so bad? You got to make them take an oath. I mean, it's nice that you want to leave because your soul says to leave, but there's another approach. So if you end up staying, it's not so bad. It's also a holy position. Proof is that's the position of Yosef, your son, the righteous tzaddik. It's not exactly in line with your soul's mission. No, so what? Maybe it's better for the Jews. I know your soul runs to be elevated. Your soul really never made peace with Egypt, and your whole thing is shining a light from above. And therefore, when the time comes, it's Sasani, get me out of here, uplift me. I don't want to be here to begin with. I certainly don't want to be here now. But let's say the Pharaoh doesn't give permission and the Joseph relents, and you end up staying. Don't you think it'll be better for the Jews in a sense, because you're going to uplift them from there? So maybe, don't think so much about yourself and your mission. Think about the Jews. So the Rebbe says, no. Even for the mission of the Jews, and for the empowerment of the Jews, this is better. And this is explained by the analogy of the two lifeguards. It's not just that Jacob needs to go to Israel because that's where he's comfortable. But that's where the Jews need him. The Jews actually need a Jacob and a Joseph, just like we need two shaliachs. We need two lifeguards. We need one who's going in and one who's on the shore. And if Jacob was buried in Egypt just like Joseph, it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be that we have more empowerment. It would be We're lacking on our anchor. We have 2 lifeguards going in, but we have no one on the shore holding them back. And that ain't going to work. This reminds me, by the way, of another Sicha. Where the Rebbe explains that why the mother of Moses, Yocheved, was born between the walls. It's a fascinating thing that when they did the census of the Jewish people, the Torah says in last week's portion that was 70, but if you count it, it comes out to 69. This is such a Torah thing. It's never exact. It's 70, but it's 69. It's like, and Rashi explains, because Yocheved, Moses' mother, was born between the walls. I guess like a nice safe border. They had one wall and another wall. She was born right in between. So where was she born? Well, when they came to Egypt, she was already born. But when they left Canaan, she wasn't born yet. So she's not Egyptian, but she's not Canaanite. She's somewhere in between the walls. And she's the presto number 70. Does it have to be so complicated? I mean, don't you think it's Basher, God, who plans everything, couldn't make it that she should give birth, a day later, an hour later in Egypt, comfortable in Goshen? She has to give birth between the walls. And we all know about this from the census, that it's 70, but it's not really. And the Rabbi explains in another talk, very much the same point. Yocheved is the mother of Moses, the Redeemer of Israel. Or if you will, the 3 Redeemers of Israel, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. The Redeemer of Israel has to be empowered with the power of between the walls. She needs to, on the one hand, be engaged with Egypt. On the other hand, she needs to be aloof from Egypt. Because if she's engaged, she's like a lifeguard jumping into the pool. You're going to drown. On the other hand, if she's not engaged, she's completely aloof. There's no connection. And therefore, the mother of the Redeemer or Redeemers of Israel is between the walls. She's connected to Egypt, but she's not really bogged down. She, in a sense, is aloof. You might say, like a regular person, you want to save someone by the pool, you got to be next to the pool, but not in the pool. If you're a block away, you're not going to be helpful. So over there, in that talk, it's the one person of Yocheved or Moses who has both sides. In our talk, it's 2 people. We have the giant soul of Jacob emigrating, being buried in the Holy Land, elevating the Jews from the perch. Joseph buried in Egypt to elevate the Jews from the trenches, and together we pull them out. The Rebbe concludes the Sicha. All right, so this becomes the entire flow. I'm very proud of my map. Again, I would love feedback on it. Hopefully, we'll polish it up for future. But it's giving the whole flow of the Sicha right in front of you. Question, answer, objection, and then the answer. And then an objection, which pushes the Rebbe to a Hasidic answer. And then finally, another question and answer to finish it up. The Rebbe concludes with powerful lessons. The Rebbe says that this teaches us how we should relate to Gullus. We're supposed to be in Gullus. Proof is that we're here, and we have a job to do, and there's a lot of plus to it. We're elevating the godly sparks and everything else, and we're making a home for God in the lowest place. Exile is a tremendous thing. The Rebbe famously taught us, and from the prophets and from the sages, that when Mashiach comes, it's in Hayom Yom, the Rebbe's book of daily meditations, we're going to look back, we're going to long for the days of exile when we're able to accomplish something in the adverse environment, etc., etc. We're going to thank God for the challenges of exile. The prophet says, hard to imagine, because they empowered us and gave us a chance to play an important role. All of the good stuff. Exile has tremendous virtue. At the same, and that's why we do our service of Hashem with Simcha. We know that we're playing an important role. We're partners in creation. We don't live miserable in exile. We live with Simcha. We have a mission to do. At the same time, we never should be coming home. We should all have an element, even as we are engaged in exile. And we're living it with daily, with energy and everything else, because we know it's important and critical and pivotal. At the same time, there's a part of us that says, get me the heck out of here, Nisasani. I remember when the Rebbe said this, Sicha, I was present. The Rebbe was screaming that a Yid has to say, Nisasani Mitzrayim, take me out of Egypt. Lift me up. I don't want to be, I don't belong here. Yes, I have a mission to do, but ultimately, this is not my place. I belong with Hashem, with Mashiach. And therefore, says the Rebbe, we're so obsessed with this, it's an oath. He brings in a footnote from the Medrash that Joseph represents God. Jacob represents the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, Jacob, make God, Joseph, take an oath that Mashiach's going to come. And Hashem gave us an oath. So therefore, we become obsessed like something of an oath. Constantly. Hopefully Hashem is obsessed with it. But we too are supposed to be obsessed. And that's why we want and wait to Mashiach from a Torah perspective, not in general and principle, constantly. The desire and the belief and the desperate need and prayer for Mashiach is supposed to be in real time every single minute. If you want to know what that looks like, we saw it by the Rebbe. But the Rebbe showed us that this is how essentially all of us are supposed to live. What did we say in Ani Mamin? I believe with complete faith that Mashiach is coming, and until, even though he tarries, I wait for him every moment. And the Rebbe says, not I wait for him that any moment he could come. I wait for him every moment. Every moment I anticipate it. And this is mirrored in our prayer in the daily Amidah 3 times a day. I long for your salvation, not every day, the whole day. And the Rebbe talks about it in this Sicha. And I remember when the Rebbe was saying it many times, the Rebbe said it. But the Rebbe said it at this particular Sicha too, that this is an obsession. This is an oath. It's not an important thing. Part of Judaism is that ultimately Mashiach should come one day. That would be akin to a promise. I'm telling you, I got to do it. It's on my to-do list. Not only a to-do, it's important, and it's urgent, and we got to take care of it. We got to get there. No. An oath means that even now, before I get there, I'm constantly obsessed. How am I going to get there? Which explains the daily obsession of Mashiach in our prayers over and over and over again, because it's an oath. The concept of Mashiach, the concept that ultimately the Jewish people don't belong in exile and won't be in exile. This is not a nice thing. It's not just a nice ending to the story. It's even now in exile, in Golos, it's burnt into our skin. The same way Yehuda says to his father, I'm going to bring you Benjamin and you can count on it. My life depends on it. That's how a Yid has to feel about it, Mashiach. You want to know what that looks like? That's what we saw by the Rebbe too. I mean, we saw a Yid who couldn't stand the exile. Even though he was doing so much, he was turning over the whole world and bringing Yiddishkeit to the whole world, unprecedented. And yet every day in exile was like, what am I doing here? And you just wonder, like, why? And this is the explanation. Because there's an oath. A Yid doesn't belong here. And a Yid screams to Hashem, lift me out of this. And I want to take the liberty of applying this also in another way, which mirrors that. Another lesson, which I think is very useful and relevant as well. And that is that even though we are the generation of the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe, and our job, like Joseph, the previous Rebbe, is to be engaged. And that's what we do. We elevate the physical through our sparks, through mivtzayim, through being engaged with people, through engaging in business and commerce, making money, giving tzedakah, building Yiddishkeit, building life, all of this materialistic stuff for the sake of heaven, for the sake of elevation. This is our mission. We're not supposed to be sitting a whole day studying Torah and praying. We're supposed to be engaged. That's the mission of our generation. We're a Joseph generation, not so much a Jacob generation. However, we have an element of Jacob in our lives. Every single day we spend time in prayer and Torah study. That's how we start our day. That's how we finish our day. And the way the Rebbe would speak about it, that this concept, the time when I'm studying Torah, what the Rebbe would call Kfiyas Itim LaTorah, the daily study sessions that each of us take out of our busy schedule, which is our main mission, is when we're doing the stuff of life. But that, let's call it 1 hour a day, 2 hours a day, whatever it might be that we're afforded to sit and study Torah, we're totally disengaged from the world. And you might say, what's wrong? The world is so good. The engagement is such a mitzvah, and we're elevating the sparks, again, through everything that we do, through mivtzayim, through Chabad houses, through shlichus, or our daily business. Because all of this is ultimately part of the mission. I'm going to work so I can make money, so I can give tzedakah, I can take care of my family. It's all making a home for Hashem in the physical. So the engagement in the world is good. It's not a necessary evil. Nevertheless, still in all, there's a Jacob hour. When I'm studying Torah, there is no world. This too I heard from the Rebbe, that when the time that a person is able to make their own study Torah session time, which we all need to do, The Rebbe said it should be like Shabbos. When the phone rings, I don't even hear it. His meaning is that we're totally disengaged. We're like a Jacob, because we understand that even though a Jew is engaged in the world and by design, and that's not a bad thing, in a sense and on some level, on the Jacob level of our soul, we are completely aloof from the world. It's not really who we are. In fact, the only reason we're engaged is because our ability to elevate it. And where does that manifest? In the time of the day that we live like a Jacob. We live aloof. Our Torah study takes us to a space that the world doesn't bog us down at all for that hour. And therefore, the rest of the day, when we are engaged with outreach, with involvement, with physicality, with business, etc., we remember who we really are. We got the two lifeguards. We remain aloof even as we remain engaged. And this way we guarantee we don't get schlepped down. We actually elevate up. So the conclusion of the Sicha, of course, is we want Mashiach now. And as I recently heard in a talk from the Rabbi was crying for Mashiach. And the Rebbe says, why are we crying for Mashiach? We know that every day in exile is tremendous pleasure to Hashem because we're creating elevations of divine sparks. Because every descent brings an ascent. The Rebbe started screaming in that Sicha. Enough descents and enough ascents. Genug yerides, genug aliyas. Enough! He was speaking to Hashem. I know you like this and we're elevating and we're doing more good. Enough descents and enough ascents. It's enough. Let's get going. We want Mashiach now.